the words at the base of the Statue of Liberty that read, "Give us your tired, your poor." You are implementing a public charge rule for the first time. Is that sentiment, "Give us your tired, your poor," still operative in the United States, or should those words come down? Should the plaque come down off the Statue of Liberty?
Well, I'm certainly not prepared to take anything down off the Statue of Liberty. We have a long history of being one of the most welcoming nations in the world on a lot of bases, whether you be an asylee, whether you be coming here to join your family, or immigrating yourself. I do not think by any means we're ready to take anything off the Statue of Liberty.
That was the acting director of the Citizenship and Immigration Services yesterday, announcing the Trump administration's latest steps to reshape this country's immigration system, and thank God, promising for now not to take the plaque off the Statue of Liberty. Joining us now, a member of the Judiciary and Armed Services Committee, Democratic Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii. Senator, great to have you in New York with us.
Nice to be here.
Just your reaction to that regulation. We talked about it earlier this morning. Again, we're talking about legal immigrants having basically a wealth standard to whether or not you can enter the country.
This is yet another assault on immigration and immigrants, and now with these new rules, it's going to be harder for people to stay in our country, and it's going to be harder for people to come into our country. And all this talk about we're not taking anything off the Statute of Liberty, please, please. BS. That's all I can say.
So as a United States Senator, this is a regulation coming.
Yes.
What can you all do about this, thwarting this, if that you believe it ought to be done?
Well, we knew that this was being contemplated, so many of us wrote to the administration saying don't do it. In fact, just for this regulation, they had almost 300,000 comments on this proposed regulation that's going to make it a lot harder for immigrants in our country. And so that pretty much fell on deaf ears because this administration and this president is so anti-immigrant that they are doing everything they can to make life as hard as possible for people who are already here legally and people who want to come here. So anybody who's under 18, over 61, that's going to count against you. And of course, you know, the public charge has been expanded to such a degree that people who want to stay here longer are going to have a harder time qualifying.
So what's your understanding, Senator, of how this would work, just so our viewers can understand? In other words, an immigrant tries to come here, goes through all the legal steps that you're supposed to do it the right way. What stands in his or her way? What steps now would that immigrant have to take that he or she didn't have to take before?
So there's a lot of discretion left to the immigration officer who's going to review these applications. As I said, if you're under 18 or over 61, that's going to count against you. If you don't know English very well, that's going to count against you. And they look at the totality of the circumstances, which means really a wide discretion to the officer reviewing these applications. So if they think that somehow or other you're not going to be able to work, then you're going to possibly be deemed someone who is going to end up being a public charge. And then think of all the people who are already here legally who might want to change their status, get a green card. They're going to also have a really hard time if they've ever accessed any kind of government programs.
Which meant, I mean, I applied for a green card. I'd been in the country for 10 years already, and then I applied for a green card. And that's how most people apply for green cards. They come here legally. They don't want to change their status. And it's quite possible that at some point during those 10 years, you're out of work. I was out of work for about 2 or 3 years while I was raising my kids. I may have needed some kind of financial assistance. I would then be in the category where I couldn't get it. But it's also, don't you think, Senator, a way to discriminate who comes into this country and who doesn't. Stephen Miller has made this very clear from the very beginning. He would like a certain type of people. It's basically race-based. I mean, they would like white Norwegians to come into the country, and he's used the term of Norway before. And so it's not about money so much, I think, as it is about where you come from.
I completely agree. And it's very clear that who the president doesn't want in our country, and basically, you know, it's all the countries that he's called SO countries. It's brown people, it's black people who are already here, yellow people from Asia. I mean, some of the longest lines for legal visas are people waiting in line in the Philippines and Asian countries. So it is all about keeping a whole bunch of people out of our country, even as we need these workers, by the way. Hello, look at the raid that went on in Mississippi. Who were all these people working in these chicken plants or these meatpacking plants that the U.S. citizens don't want to work in? So our economy is very much based on immigrants coming here.
Why weren't any of the plant owners arrested?
Great question. Great question. But yet again, it's this kind of what I would call uneven enforcement. You get the people who are the most vulnerable to these kinds of attacks, I would call it, and that's who you go after, not the people who are making money off of basically cheap labor that they don't have to pay benefits or do anything for. So this is an all-out assault on immigration, and as you probably know, I am an immigrant myself, and when you make it really hard for immigrants to have their families with them, in my case, I always grew up in a 3-generation household where everybody worked. My grandparents came here, they had green cards, they were not U.S. citizens, they paid their taxes for years, and this is really the foundation of our country. And it makes me really, basically it hurts my heart, it makes me sick when I hear my colleagues, especially during the massive immigration reform bill that we did in 2013, that they come to the floor and talk about how their parents or their grandparents were immigrants, and then they go and vote against a bill that would have enabled 11 million people on a path to citizenship. So the kind of hypocrisy that I see is rampant, but it falls on deaf ears.
Senator Casey Hunt is where you normally are in Washington with a question for you. Casey?
Senator, good morning. It's good to see you. I'd like to ask you about the unfolding debate about guns. Mitch McConnell was on the radio last week saying that the Senate can't possibly do nothing, and saying that there will be a debate come the fall. First, I'm wondering, do you believe him that actually is going to be the debate? But also, do you trust anything that Mitch McConnell would be willing to put on the floor around gun reforms?
It would be news to me if Mitch McConnell actually allowed any kind of real debate on gun safety. We've had the House-passed bill sitting in the Senate for months now, and so we've been here before. I think the NRA still holds a great deal of sway with both Mitch McConnell as well as the president, and so we shall see. But this whole emphasis on red flag laws, the evidence is that such laws will enable people to probably will decrease the number of suicides, for example. But those kinds of laws, and I do support them, because if we can save someone from committing suicide, that's great. But it doesn't get to all of the assault weapons that are awash in our country, and it doesn't get to the huge loopholes that we have in background checks.
Senator, a moment ago, Katty made a point that I want to pursue, which is it's not just about immigration, because we've had for 10, 15, 20 years a discussion on how to do immigration right. You were part of the 2013 reform bill. I think Condi Rice said that was one of the greatest disappointments, that administration couldn't do it. What's intersected right now, it seems to me, is the politics of immigration and racism. And that this time it's different, because the people pursuing it keep saying racist things. Do you feel that that's the problem now?
I think there are so many things that are the problem, but I think to the extent that we're so much talking about what do we really stand for as a country, where are our values. We have a president who lies every single day. We have a president who is attacking immigrants, not just immigrants, but anybody who doesn't agree with him every single day. So you can talk about their racist components, of course, to this. Huge anti-immigrant initiatives on the part of this administration, and the lies every single day. And I feel like it is an assault on our democracy and our democratic institutions.
Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat of Hawaii, great to see you in New York.
Nice
Thanks for being with us.
Aloha.
Coming up next, Ben Rhodes was at President Obama's side during some of the biggest foreign policy decisions of the last administration. He joins us next to talk about the trade war with China and the tinderbox that is Hong Kong right now. Plus, new reporting in Politico suggests some evangelicals are losing patience with President Trump, but not for the reason you might imagine. We'll talk to the author of a new book entitled The Immoral Majority. That's next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.